Well, welcome back, everyone. An awesome guest today, Jill Sitnick, who I think is going to talk about a topic that maybe for those of you who who have listened to my show before, probably is a little different than what you're expecting. Jill, welcome to the program, and thank you for showing up.
Joe, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, got to talk to you a little bit before off camera, and obviously I read your story and your website and everything else. But can you please just tell our audience who you are, what you do?
Yeah. So, hi, everybody. My name is Jill Sitnick. I am the Journey Sage, and the Journey Sage comes from the idea of understanding how psychedelic assisted psychotherapy journeys can help heal mental health issues like PTSD and depression. In my particular instance, in 2020, I was diagnosed with PTSD due to some childhood trauma that decided to rear its head rather midlife for me. And through a variety of what I think to be good luck, I happened upon MDMA therapy for PTSD. And very long story short, within 1 year and 3 therapeutic journeys, I then no longer qualified for a PTSD diagnosis. And so now I talk about that experience to take away the stigma of MDMA so that other people can benefit from, this therapy in the future.
Well, yeah, that's great. And I've heard a lot of podcasts, like from Joe Rogan's probably the one I listen to the most, who's most notable. Who he's talked
Mhm.
about it. I think Aaron Rodgers potentially has talked about it.
Yep.
What led you down that track toward MDMA?
Oh, it was completely by accident. It was, and accident's a funny word. My partner of more than 20 years had passed away 8 years ago, actually, July. And I had treated myself to therapy. Grief is a hard thing to deal with, and I don't think American society really understands that. And so I treated myself and wound up connecting with a wonderfully brilliant therapist. And about 18 months after Carl's passing, everything seemed to be going well. The job was going well. The house was going well. I even had a boyfriend. And suddenly I got a work email that just kind of spun me out. I know now that it triggered a whole bunch of childhood security issues. But all I knew back then was that I was petrified that my life was going to be ruined off of this work email that, like, on a scale of 1 to 10 was like a 1. But to my body, I wasn't sleeping well. My stomach was upset. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. My shoulders were up to my ears with tension. And I went back to my therapist, who always kind of let me pick up and put down therapy. And after a couple of months of talking to her and starting at that point to talk about childhood stuff, because we had never talked about childhood stuff before that, it was all about grief. Um, After a couple of months of those conversations and my symptoms not going away with just talk therapy, she diagnosed me with PTSD. I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which kind of proved it to me. Trust me, I didn't believe her. I was like, have you met me? Come on. And turns out, and this is where the luck part comes in, she was training to be a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist, specifically with MDMA. And she said, go look at the research on maps.org, maps.org. At the time, they had just completed their phase 2 clinical trials, which showed about 3/4 of the people after 3 treatments didn't qualify for a PTSD diagnosis. And
Wow.
ultimately, because I trusted my therapist and I knew that we would also be partnering with her mentor, who at the time was a medical doctor, and I wasn't making any progress with talk therapy. So it all kind of came together in a really beautiful way.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
so you started this. You had the luck of, as you said, kind of lucky timing of the right person at the right time. Well, as far as like the insurance goes, as far as like recognized treatment, like how does that all work? Was it all out of pocket, or what? How did you manage that?
All out of pocket. And I mean, and it was underground, to be candid, to be completely transparent. I was not part of a clinical trial. This was underground. And luckily, I mean, I was a corporate girl. I was a Microsoft girl for a lot of years. So for me, knock on wood, the treatment wasn't anything I couldn't handle. But yes, in the future, the idea of how much insurance will cover will absolutely be an issue, because for those of you who know a little bit about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, a journey day, the actual day of procedure, the same way that an operation can take hours with multiple people in the room, my therapy was me, my therapist, and my guide, who was a medical doctor, for on average 6 to 8 hours each journey, 3 times. And so it can be a little pricey. It is legal in Australia right now. They legalized it last summer, and they are right now kind of dealing with the expense of this particular therapy. So it's a really good question you just asked.
Yeah. So how would one, as you know, we'll get to some more stuff later, but I'm really curious. So how would one explore this treatment for themselves? How do you get in touch with a reputable person that goes through kind of something similar to what you did?
Right. Well, so just to be completely transparent for everybody, this treatment has not been FDA approved in the US yet. We are all crossing our fingers. It's supposed to be FDA approved in August. And then the DEA has 3 months to go ahead and reschedule the psychedelic MDMA for clinician use. And then at that point, if that all happens, you're going to see clinics make this therapy available. And it would be that patients like myself would then be going to the site and having this treatment at this site. This is not a situation where like you would get prescribed MDMA and go to, the pharmacy or anything of that sort. My therapy was very much talk therapy to prepare, the actual journey day, going to a place, and then integration. So that's what it would look like. So let's all keep our fingers crossed that it'll be nice and legal and available in 2025. Until that point, there are different channels. I've got some things on my website. People can find psychedelic professionals. And I'm very, very specific in a lot of my videos talking about really vet the person you're working with, because there are a ton of brilliant people who have been working underground for years. And then there's people who have done 2 mushroom journeys and think they can heal the world. So, and more power to them if they can.
Yeah.
But when you're talking the same way that you would interview a doctor, or you might go get a second opinion, everything you would do to keep yourself safe with what we would call like a traditional medical procedure, do when you're talking about psychedelics. Vet who you're working with. Feel free to reach out to numerous people, get their credentials, things of that sort.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You brought up that is not something you're prescribed and you just go home and you take it like, a traditional
SSRI.
Like you are going to a facility and you have someone with you for 6 to 8 hours a day. I think a lot of people maybe have the misconception, to include myself. I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not very familiar with the process at all, but that is something that you get in a box or a bag or a pill bottle and you take it home and then you just hope for the best. But that's not the case, right?
No.
Like, can you walk us through, like, when you go there, kind of what that experience is like? Or I know you made a great point, right? If you're going to get a surgery, you would get a second opinion, you would do all the prep that leads up to it and everything else. And there's expectation you're in there for however long till it's complete and taken care of. Can you walk us through what it's like, maybe going through one of these sessions?
Yeah. And thank you for the opportunity to do so, because when I explain to people that this is because when you say psychedelics, people start giggling.
Yeah.
And when you start to frame it as the medical procedure that it is, people suddenly start paying attention. And I'm really thrilled about that, because this is not a turnkey, just take a pill and 8 hours later you don't have PTSD. That's not the way this works.
Right.
Psychotherapy and therapeutic support are paramount in this healing environment. So think of it, I was an English major, so I keep the math really, really simple.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So 40, 20, 40. 40%, think of each journey day as a medical procedure. So 40% of the time before that procedure is the preparation, talking to your therapist, What do you want to achieve? What's blocking you? What's holding you back? For me, during my experience, it was all about fear, basically because my father brutalized me most
Mhm.
of my life. So I had that childish fear, but I didn't know that. All I know is that I just felt fear that like the universe was going to, come and get me. 20% of the time is the actual journey day. And usually you hear people talking about psychedelic trips when they're talking recreation. When you hear psychedelic journey, it's usually more of a therapeutic or inner healing kind of process. So that's why I'm using that terminology. And that day is with preferably two people, and it's recorded. We used my phone's audio. Well, we had a tech glitch in the second journey, but that's all right. That's all right. But have it recorded so you can listen back, because what you say in an enhanced state can be incredibly enlightening. And then the last 40% is what is typically called integration in psychedelic circles. Think of it as mental physical therapy. You have to put a little bit of time in terms of, like, maybe you have to stretch after a medical procedure, or you have to work on your strength, right?
Mhm.
With psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, that integration time is where you're taking the insights that you learned, usually the days, weeks, and even months after that therapeutic journey. You're incorporating these new beliefs. Oh, the universe isn't out to get me the way the toddler thought it was. My father was just a jerk.
Mm.
And starting to integrate that new way of thinking into life. So 40, 20, 40 is kind of the way to think about it.
Okay. And then, so what is the role of the people there with you? The I guess what do you call it, the doctor and a trusted person, or
Yep, yep, yep,
what's the
yep.
makeup?
You'll hear different terminology. I don't think any of it's wrong. I think right now it's kind of people are figuring it out. You can hear the term guide. You can hear the term facilitator. I always like to point out that my therapist was there. And the fact that our guide, or my guide, was also a medical doctor. So that's why you hear me say the word doctor.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would say whatever the people you're working with are very comfortable with. Their role is twofold, at least the way I see it in a therapeutic journey. There's always something called holding space. A lot of times when we're working through trauma, whether it's childhood, battlefield, an attack of some sort, deep grief, we hold on to those trauma memories because we weren't able to work them out with an empathetic witness. An
Mm.
empathetic witness just means, somebody to come along and help you out with those emotions. The two people that are there, a lot of times they're holding space and they're being empathetic witnesses. The other aspect is that when a patient, meaning myself, there were a couple of times in my journeys where I voiced, I wasn't lovable, I should never have been born, there's no reason for me to be taking up space in this world. I had
Mm.
all of these deeply seated childhood created beliefs. And in those instances, those two trained people gently pushed back. Is that true?
Mm.
Why do you think that way? So I would say, a very kind, compassionate kind of talk therapy, not nearly at the level of talk therapy when you're not in an enhanced state, because usually the patient, at least in my case, and from what I'm hearing, the patient really dictates what is talked about, when it's talked about. And there's just pushback from the people facilitating if something really dangerous comes out of the person's mouth.
I gotcha. And so I read on your that you recommend journaling during this period.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So? Is that after your therapy, or is there someone recording for you during that time, or how does that work?
Oh, well, so I fully recommend getting your sessions voice recorded. You don't want to see yourself on video in an enhanced state. At
Okay.
least I wouldn't want to. I don't need to see that. But the recording does a couple of things. It makes sure everybody is ethically appropriate. And it
Mhm.
really does let you later on, when you hear the stuff that you said about yourself, you're like, oh my gosh. So the recording is there. And I found it very helpful to transcribe my recordings to really kind of pick apart where my mind was. But then, secondly, integration. I was an English major. I was an English teacher way back in the day. I
Mhm.
love writing. and I type faster than I write. It was very natural for me to go to a journal process. The interesting part, my therapist used this analogy with me, because I said, at some point I almost forget what it was like to feel a certain way. And she was delightful. And she said, well, do you think a butterfly remembers what it's like to be a caterpillar? Well, a butterfly is more excited to be a butterfly. And so if I hadn't journaled and been able to see my thought processes change, I almost wouldn't believe that I used to think a certain way. Now, if you're not a journaler, if you're an artist, if you're a musician, if you are an exerciser, I would say whatever works for you. For me, journaling really helped.
Okay. And so when you're going through this process, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, I know you said you're being treated before.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any, were you on any kind of, or did you go to behavioral health or therapy before that and they prescribed something else and then we
No.
said MD? Oh, okay. And
No.
the reason I asked that is because as a service member, PTSD is pretty rampant. And so a lot of us go through what we call behavioral health care while we're in. If you can ask to be seen, you can be referred to be seen. And so we go through, or it can be everything from just counseling to counseling and medication or just medication, depending on your plan, right?
Sure.
Obviously, this is not something that we can do while we're in the service, but there's a lot of retiring, transitioning service members who maybe have received this care or received medication, therapy before. And when we talked earlier, it's potential that it could be legalized soon, and maybe the VA may recognize it if the FDA does. Is there any kind of conflict between treatment that you have received before and maybe even in some cases rely on, and then going to the MDMA? Is there a conflict between providers or anything like that?
I'm going to answer the question from my experience and from what I've researched. So I was on, because of the grief, about 6 months after Carl died, I went on Wellbutrin. I went to a psychiatrist off of my therapist's recommendation. So I was on Wellbutrin when I got that big panic attack. And so when we started talking about MDMA therapy, I needed to wean myself off of Wellbutrin, which was really fine. All Wellbutrin did for me was just kind of numb the grief, which at the time I needed. I'm very thankful to Wellbutrin, trust me. I was very, very thankful. But I didn't have any other diagnosis. I didn't have a depression diagnosis, so I wasn't on any other drugs or an SSRI other than, and I'm not even sure what Wellbutrin is. I guess I should look, but I wasn't on anything else. But there is a lot of concern in the psychedelic community, and this is part of the issue with clinical trials for psilocybin in depression, that you do have to go off of SSRIs. The psilocybin or magic mushrooms they just don't work nearly as well in conjunction with the SSRI. So that's a little bit of a challenge. I was literally just reading today clinical research with the psychedelic Bufo or 5-MeO-DMT. And the people in the clinical trial actually on SSRIs because they have treatment-resistant depression. And so the researchers wanted to see if this group could actually still stay on their SSI, but use Bufo as a psychedelic to help get them out of their depression. And so far, their first clinical trial, it was like 55% did pretty well. Oh. So I only mention that because as of right now, and the compounds that we have right now, SSRIs and MDMA, they don't work. And SSRIs and psilocybin, from what I know, they don't really work. But in the future, with more research, who knows what combinations might be able to work better. I mean, we desperately need more research to help folks so that you don't have this awful time period of going off of one medication that's really helping you in preparation for this other one.
Yeah.
It's a real challenge. So that's the way. I think there was more to your question, but that's kind
no,
of
that's well, that part is definitely on par, because
okay.
one of my concerns, right, is if you're on this medication while you're in the service or shortly after you get out, and then it's identified that this might be a way to help you get better, the time it takes for you to wean off of whatever level you have, and then is there a gap between, like, they say don't eat 6 hours before surgery. Is there like you can't be on something for a certain amount of hours or days prior to this, or is it recommended to not be a part of like a day or two?
I don't. You know what? I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to that. I think I was off of Wellbutrin probably about a month before my journey.
Okay.
I think Wellbutrin leaves your system if you've weaned it properly pretty quickly. But I'm not an expert on any of that. I would say doctors would be able to advise folks way better than me.
Okay. Yeah, I just know when I switched from, and I can't remember the one pill I was on, but when I switched from one to another, weaning off it was not awesome. Like,
right.
It was like, oh man, this is
right.
This is not great.
Hence the whole reason that you're on it.
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah.
So yeah, that was interesting. And then just the other half of that was, we talked prior to coming on camera, was I think you mentioned that the FDA is looking at this, and that the VA potentially has already started some studies, but they won't do it unless the FDA does. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so here's the interesting irony the closer we get to approval. The FDA designated MDMA therapy for PTSD as breakthrough therapy designation back in 2017. So the FDA has been working with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, with these clinical trials for obviously years. And so what's really interesting is that now we're getting to the point of an approval process, and MAPS actually had to divest, and Lykos Therapeutics, which is a for-profit company, is actually the company that had to submit the application to the FDA, which got priority review status, which means they would review all of the data within 6 months versus 9 to 12 months. So all of that sounds really positive. The FDA has been involved. They have priority application status. And yet we have an advisory committee I think it was last week or the week before, that voted no for the FDA to approve MDMA, because you can't necessarily prove that MDMA alone without therapeutic intervention works, because you can't. The therapy is a part of it. And so the FDA is in this weird, the advisory was like, well, you can't necessarily say this particular chemical is what heals people. I mean, kids are using ecstasy and Molly every single weekend, and no one's talking about their trauma being healed. It goes hand in hand with therapy, and the FDA does not regulate therapy. So we're in this really weird kind of semantic thing. The VA there's lots of PR out there that through philanthropic efforts, they are ready to do additional research to, figure this out for folks, and they're ready to go. So I'm really desperately hoping the FDA approves in some way, shape, or form, so that research at the VA can, really pick up speed.
You brought up a good point, and that gray area that it is in. Would it not be more beneficial? So if people are having this done already, wouldn't it be more beneficial to, and safer maybe medically, to regulate it so that it is not, so that, instead of doing it in like a guy in Philadelphia's basement, it's you're getting it done by a provider, right? Or
you got it. I couldn't have said it. You don't even need me here. You just said it.
Maybe I can get on the board of the FDA.
I really don't think it's the FDA as the
Yeah.
issue. I think there's just one of the reasons I talk about this therapy is because there's just so much stigma around psychedelics. And there was so much Monday morning quarterbacking going on. I listened to about 3 hours of that advisory committee meeting,
Hmm.
and just the Monday morning quarterbacking and the stigma and the lack of real understanding that what MDMA is and what it does for trauma. So yeah, I love that. Why don't we actually approve it and regulate it so people can heal and it doesn't take place, in somebody's backyard? That was, by the way, that was not my situation,
Yeah,
but
I know.
could be.
Yeah, I may have. Yeah, I might be violating a major rule of someone born in Pittsburgh interviewing someone in Philadelphia.
You
So
are.
so
You
so we'll keep it away from sports. I think we'll be okay.
are. Very dangerous podcast right now.
Yes,
We're
definitely.
on
Or
thin ice.
I might have to end this right now. Yeah, good thing it's not live. I wouldn't want to check the comments on. But so I guess what would you say, if there are any, is
Mhm.
some of the potential risks
Sure.
of this
Yep.
procedure? And obviously, right now, with it not being regulated the way it hopefully would be one day, what's some of the risks?
Yeah. So MDMA is a stimulant. So when you hear about kids kind of overheating at raves or at concerts, it's because MDMA is a stimulant and you do have to stay hydrated. So if you have any sort of heart issue, MDMA might not be for you. Additionally, if schizophrenia runs in your family or you've been diagnosed with schizophrenia, the guiding framework right now is that psychedelics are really not for you. So those two things I was screened for immediately. I don't have any sort of phobias. I'm not manic depressive or anything of that sort.
Mhm.
So really make sure that you know what your diagnosis is. Don't just assume that you have PTSD. You might have anxiety, and MDMA may or may not really help you with that. Um, I think the other thing to keep in mind is just working with people who are knowledgeable. Understand especially if you're working with a medical professional, and if you're not working with a medical professional, make sure you have a friend on speed dial in case there's any sort of problem. I'm not hearing of problems, assuming people are screened properly. The stimulant part, the heart racing part, is one of the issues that people talk about the most, and I think should really be something to consider for your own health benefit so that you don't run into that problem. But other than that, you don't hear of major addiction stories. I mean, anybody can get addicted to anything, but kids are doing this for partying, and we're not hearing about MDMA addiction centers or anything of that sort. Um, and then other than that, it's, you have a little bit of a hangover the next day,
Mhm.
but you can actually deal with that with a couple of supplements and just making sure that you just have a relaxed day afterward with some soup and cuddle up in some blankets and relax.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, I obviously I looked at your website, and you brought up earlier about, and when I asked the question on how do you find reputable people,
Mhm.
reputable sources to even consider this treatment.
Yep. Yep.
But also, I would point out on your website, among other things, your book,
Oh.
and you also have your document on like journaling and everything else. I will tell you, I know you've mentioned you were English major. The very captivating, like it's one of those reads that it's like, okay, well, what's next? Like it's you just want to keep reading and going deeper and deeper into the book. I know you lived through it and it was horrible. So it's kind of weird for me to say how great the book is, but it was like,
Oh,
wow.
so you read some of the chapters on the
Yeah, I
website.
was like, holy
Okay.
crap, like this is amazing. Like, it, um, that when did you write this book? And like, was this the birth of out of this therapy and
Yep.
the creativity and everything else that came out of this? Because it really hooks you in, and it's like, again, it's horrible that all this happened to you, but like the book itself is like, it's incredible.
Well, thank you. So
Yeah.
at the end of my third journey, so my first journey was September, my second journey was December, my third journey was May. And there was a major trauma block that we spent from January to May preparing for. And when I came out of that journey, usually after therapeutic journeys, you don't necessarily know what has kind of happened. You only remember 5, 7, 8 hours. You remember 45 minutes of it. That's why you want to record it.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular experience was so healing and profound that I remembered it when I came out of the enhanced state. And I said to my therapist and guide, people need to know about this therapy from someone like me, a corporate girl. Like, I needed to hear about this therapy from someone like me. And I love the psychedelic space, but sometimes you've got somebody with rainbow hair and 1,000 different piercings. And the corporate girl that I wasn't going to listen to that person.
Yeah.
And so I said, I need to share and explain what this therapy is. And basically, I was working at Microsoft at the time. I quit Microsoft around January and then dedicated January to April to writing the book. And the book is you in a sidecar with me through that year. So you kind of get a little deep into my life. And because the only way I could explain how the therapy helps you reframe your memories is by sharing some of those memories. You know, my mom shot herself, my dad beat me, got thrown out of houses. You know, life was a little crazy when I was a kid. And so I talk about some of that stuff. And so I get a little deep. So some people are kind of like, well, some people reading it are like, oh, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And other people who had great childhoods are like, I don't understand this. So I warn people, it's a memoir. It's literally the year, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This is not turnkey therapy. And then went back into the corporate world, went with Amazon for a little bit and went to a retreat. I went on a psychedelic tourism retreat. And I found that people were very disappointed in their results. They did not prepare. Remember, I talked about that 40%?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I got my teacher hat on and I made my workbook. And the workbook is the 8 different ways that my therapist and I came up with the intentions for my work. I mean, in some ways, like, I like to joke with my therapist that I totally stole from her because these were the strategies that we used.
Yeah.
And so I made the workbook. And then a couple of other things happened where I was able to spend some real time focusing on this work. I created the YouTube channel in preparation for this being approved by the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
I create the content that I wish had been around when I was going through it. Like just how you said, oh, you mean you wouldn't go to a pharmacy and just pick up the pill? Like that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
I get asked that question all the time. So that's what I wanted. I wanted to create the content to explain what this is, level set people's expectations that, you know, this, you don't get this therapy on a Tuesday and you're healed on Friday.
Right.
You know, this does take time. Is it like a speeding train versus horse and buggy with traditional talk therapy? Absolutely. But it's not turnkey. It requires work. And so I've just had a lovely opportunity to create this content and show people what this therapy is in anticipation of it being approved.
Well, I think it's very important what you're doing. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are, you know, have benefited from it already and will benefit going forward. And I think, you know, you mentioned, you know, as a corporate, you know, woman, you're yeah, like the image versus maybe, you know, like you said, a blue haired or, you know,
rainbow hair,
rainbow,
which is lovely.
And no offense to anyone with that, but
right.
It's a different audience, right? Like if you are talking to that audience, then sure.
Yeah.
If you're talking to the corporate person or, you know, even someone, again, I talk about the same haircuts. We all have the same haircuts in the military. We're all, you know, generally look the same. Like it's to hear a voice on the corporate side who believes in this, understands it, and research it, and that's the voice that you're hearing versus someone who you may just have a different view toward if it's coming from a different person, a different look, different whatever. And so I think that's important. It's not everyone's going to receive a message the same way, and having different perspectives preaching this, I think is important. I mean, I really do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was trying to do with this show myself. Is as I was transitioning out and retiring here,
Oh,
there was a there's a huge knowledge gap. You would have people who are leaving the service after 1 year. You'd have people leaving after 20 years, like myself, right?
uh-huh.
And all of us are all in the kind of the same classroom, getting these briefings that, hey, this is what it's like when you leave the military.
Uh-huh.
And but it's like it's a it's one thing to hear it from someone like who has been out and is an entrepreneur, or who's on the outside and receiving treatment, or is a business owner or a CEO, and this is who we're hiring. It's
Mm-hmm.
one thing to hear from them than to just hear it from someone who looks exactly like me, with the same haircut and everything else. So I think it's important. I think it's important to have different voices out there to try to fill these gaps to get the
Yeah.
knowledge out there. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I love what you're doing. I've taken a ton of your time already, and
Ah,
I just want to thank you. Is there anything you? I know you've touched on some of it, but anything you have coming up, whether it's through, and we'll be sure to have your website for the book and the YouTube and all that stuff. Is there anything else you have that you're working on
yep.
that anyone can look forward to?
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Even better.
I qualified to be part of Third Wave's psychedelic coaching program. Third Wave is a big name in psychedelics. If any of your audience is interested in updates and like an easy way to get information about psychedelics is subscribe to the Third Wave email and to Tricycle Day. Those two information sources do a really nice job of aggregating content. So those are super helpful. But I joined Third Wave's coaching program. It actually starts in like a week.
Oh,
And I heard it's very intense because I'm going to be learning a lot more of like your SSRI question
yeah.
and the interactions, the brain. I'm so curious about the synapses and how things work because I was a nerdy English teacher. I love like the brain and how things
Yeah.
work and how we learn. And so basically, probably by November, December, I'm going to be qualified. I already think I'm qualified to work with people, but I'm going to have that certification behind me to be able to assist and help with folks. And people can find me right on my website. I have a Calendly link. And
Mhm.
so I'm really looking forward to that because I get asked all the time to
Yeah.
sit with people and to help people. And I think it's important that I have some sort of credential
Mhm.
to facilitate that, make people. I would only feel comfortable with somebody with a credential, so therefore I'm getting a credential.
There you go. No, that's perfect. Well, thank you, Jill. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure anyone who reaches out talks to you will feel the same. Even though you're not from, but you're in Philly. Well,
Infilling.
I'll leave that out of the. I'll put Steelers stuff all over the thumbnail so that people
You
watch.
know
If I
what?
say it's from Philly, they'll be like, eh.
You know what? You go ahead. I am not a sports girl. That means Zippo to me. So whatever
Perfect.
your audience needs, I'm cool.
Perfect. No. Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and
Yes.
I
Thank
look
you so
forward to
much.
seeing all the great things you do.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye.